Welcome, Gunrunner.
Back when I did the 20 greatest consoles of all time viewer poll, spoiler alert for those who might not have seen it, I'll link it in the description for those that want to, the Super Nintendo was only beaten by its great 16-bit rival, the Sega Mega Drive, finishing in the runners-up spot. I already did a viewer poll to decide the greatest games for the Mega Drive, so it was inevitable I would do the same for the Super Nintendo, and here we are. Once again, I put this question to the members of several big retro gaming groups on Facebook, including the hugely popular and very lively Retro Gaming Hysteria, link in the description for those who want to join, as well as my own loyal subscribers, asking them to name their top 5 and the reasons why they chose those particular games. Following the same rules as before, I awarded 5 points to your first choice, 4 points to second, and so on and so forth. I then counted up those votes to decide the final placings, and in the case of games having the same number of points, I then went to the number of votes awarded, followed by the number of first place votes to decide the final rankings. In this particular video, I actually had to use both of these tiebreakers more than I've had to in any other video, with a very close round of scoring outside of the top 5. There weren't really any genuine surprises for me in terms of the games that made up this list. In fact, I predicted the top 5 in the exact order they appear here, and there was only one game I really expected to see in the top 20 that didn't make it. I was going to tell you what that game is because it's just so surprising not to see it make the list, but then I changed my mind and thought it was better to keep it as a surprise. So if you work out what big name game is missing, and I'm sure most of you will, let me know in the comments and I'll tell you if you're right. To be honest, there were no real surprises when it came to the wider top 40 either, which will be made available in a special video produced exclusively for my patrons around the same time that this goes out. But as I said, I don't want to give away any spoilers here with regards to the titles that did actually make the top 20, and indeed the more fulsome top 40. So it's time to start counting down the Super Nintendo games that you, my viewers, voted for as the greatest of all time.
Stay calm. Concentrate on the screen. You are about to experience the future. Never before have you had to cope with advanced 3D graphics. 360-degree rotation. 96 levels. 32,000 colors. Even more enemies. The ultimate challenge is waiting.
The 16-bit Nintendo wasn't so highly regarded for its shoot-em-ups, especially when compared to its two biggest rivals, the Sega Mega Drive and NEC PC Engine, but it did get an incredibly good conversion of the classic Capcom arcade game UN Squadron, and that kicks off this top 20. Given the huge popularity of the first Super Mario game on the SNES, not to mention the lavish praise heaped upon it by the press of the time, it was always obvious that a sequel would follow. But it's rather surprising that Super Mario World 2 Yoshi's Island didn't arrive until 1995. Steampunk-styled Wild West shooter Wild Guns was somewhat of a surprise hit for the Super Nintendo back in 1994, but since then it's built up a real cult following, so much so in fact that the game was remade as Wild Guns Reloaded for modern platforms in 2010. Of all the games that made up this top 20, Ninja Warriors was the only one that surprised me somewhat. It was certainly a pleasant surprise, as I'm a pretty big fan of this scrolling beat 'em up that originally appeared in arcades courtesy of Taito, and especially the outstanding Zuntata soundtrack. The vast majority of Konami's Super Nintendo output consisted of ports and updates of existing franchises, so Axelay is somewhat of an anomaly, especially as it remains exclusive to the console too. You voted it as the best shoot 'em up on the SNES, and it's hard to disagree. Many people regard Harvest Moon as the very first farm simulator, and it was somewhat of a surprise hit at the time of its release. But its incredible legacy is clear to see, not only in its sequels, but also in more modern games like Farmville and the even more popular Stardew Valley. Most people expected Nintendo to follow on from the success of Super Mario World with a direct sequel, but instead the Big N threw a massive curveball by releasing a cartridge containing remastered versions of all the NES Super Mario games. It proved to be a very wise move indeed. Although it originated in the arcades, it was on the Nintendo Entertainment System that Contra found its real fame, and the following sequels remained exclusive to the home, including this one, Contra 3, the very first 16-bit update of the ever-popular run-and-gun franchise. I don't think there's much disputing that Final Fantasy has become the most popular RPG franchise of all time, and although it wasn't the first game in the series, in fact this was known as the 6th game in Japan, it was Final Fantasy III that very much catapulted the series into the big time. When Nintendo brought back Mario's original nemesis for his own new game in the form of Donkey Kong Country, they stunned audiences with the use of rendered visuals. The Rare-developed game also proved to be just as good as it looked, and a sequel was pretty much inevitable. Well, what's the best way to follow Donkey Kong Country 2 and open up the top 10? It's the original game, of course, that I've already spoken about somewhat already, but it's interesting to note that the success of this game saw Donkey Kong Country become a whole new franchise of its own. Although Street Fighter II Turbo was by far the better game, Most of you mentioned the original SNES port of the classic Capcom Fighter instead. I'm guessing a lot of that is down to the huge sales push this game gave the Super Nintendo when it was first released back in the day. RPGs haven't proved that popular on the other greatest of all time videos that I've done, but the SNES chart couldn't be more different, with no less than 8 making the top 40. Chrono Trigger is often hailed as one of the greatest RPGs ever, so it's perhaps a surprise it didn't rank higher. When Konami released Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles in the arcades, it became an overnight sensation. They followed up by releasing a couple of far less impressive Nintendo games, but the arcade sequel, Turtles in Time, brought back the classic beat-em-up gameplay we all knew and loved. Konami fell back on their sizable arcade catalogue for most of their early NES releases, but the release of Castlevania changed all that, and it soon became one of the company's hottest properties, so it's no surprise to see them make it one of their first SNES games too, and what a game it is. Of all the SNES launch games, F-Zero is by far the most technically impressive, a super fast racing game that pushed the 16-bit hardware to the max with its Mode 7 effects. F-Zero spawned numerous sequels, but the franchise has been criminally ignored by Nintendo in more recent years. Who knew that putting Mario in a go-kart would become just as big a franchise as the games it was spun off from? And this is where it all began, with the release of Super Mario Kart in 1992. Its 4th place position on this list also very much proves the franchise's current worth. Another franchise that started off on the NES that was upgraded for its 16-bit successor was Metroid, but it took a bit longer than many people expected as it didn't arrive until 1994, but it was certainly worth the wait, and that's why it claims the bronze medal in your rankings. It was always going to be a fierce fight between Zelda and Mario to claim the top spot, wasn't it? Nintendo's two most beloved franchises end up appearing near the top of every greatest games list out there, but in the end Link and friends had to settle for the runners-up spot here. I think we all knew that this game was going to be number one, but there is one surprising aspect to its placing. You see, not only was Super Mario World a launch game for the console, it was also the original pack-in. So according to you, the first SNES game was also the best game and it was never bettered.
Introducing the next generation from Nintendo. New Super Mario World. Created especially for the Super Nintendo Entertainment System. It's a bit more exciting, a bit more challenging, a bit more graphic, a bit more colorful, a bit more realistic, a bit more levels, a bit more secret, a bit more enemies, a bit more friends, a bit more sound, a bit hotter, a bit cooler, a bit weird, a bit more revolutionary, a bit more Mario, a bit more of what you want. It's 16-bit, and it's yours only if you get new Super Nintendo. Now you're playing with power, superpower.
And that rounds up my look at the 20 greatest Super Nintendo games of all time. But which games were you most surprised not to see make the final list? Or are there any games that you don't think were worthy of inclusion on this countdown? We always love to hear the thoughts and views of my audience, so please get typing in that comment section. Before I go though, I must thank all of my loyal patrons who continue to support my channel and make videos like this possible. However, I must give special thanks to following patrons and YouTube backers in particular for their much appreciated pledges. Grady Haynes, Mitchell Valentino, Seth A. Robinson, Carl Olsen, Dos Gamerman, Sonic Mania 999, Paul Daniel, Andrew McKay, Retro Resolution, Matt Standish, James Taylor, Trogdor the Burninator, Mins, 8-Bit Guy, Luke MC, Ben P. Stein, Tabby Kitsune, and Electron Star Collapse. If you also want to help support all my creative endeavours, including this YouTube channel, then please go and check out my Patreon right now. You can get access to host extra content, including downloads, exclusive videos, including a top 40 version of this very video, creative insights, and much more besides. I've been the Laird, I thank you for watching, and I'll see you all again for another video very soon.